All right, welcome everyone to what is the 5th Storms Seminar Series. Real quick, for emergencies, out the back doors, down the stairs, out the front door, and to Cesar Chavez Park. Bathrooms are out the back door to the left. This is being recorded and will be posted on the Waterboard's Storm Seminar Series page. The links up on the presentation. The Storm Seminar Series, it's to advance the resource, or to advance the perspective that stormwater is a valuable resource. And today we have with us Kevin Robert Perry. Questions can be answered we'll take questions from the webcast at the storms@waterboards.ca.gov email address. I'll be monitoring that and we'll answer those afterwards. In the room, we'll have a mic that will go around. Please wait to ask your question until you have the mic. And please welcome Kevin Robert Perry.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm really excited to be here today, and thanks for everybody for being in the room and out on the web as well, to talk about transforming gray space into green space. And this is a topic that I've worked on for several years. Just a little background about myself. I actually grew up here in Sacramento in Elk Grove, and went to UC Davis and graduated there in 1996 with a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture, and then promptly moved up to Portland because that was the thing to do as a young designer, to go up to a hip place like Portland, Oregon, and started working at the city of Portland with their stormwater division there. And this was in the early 2000s. And so this presentation's kind of an evolution of design projects and theory from the early 2000s with dealing with stormwater all the way to the present day today. And I am suffering from a little bit of a head cold, so bear with me if I'm not projecting as much, and somebody tell me if I need to speak up or speak a little bit more clearly. So I do have about 170 slides today. I'm a very visual presenter. I like to show as many pictures as possible. I think that tells the best story. And this is the agenda essentially for today. Is first kind of going through the idea of why do we need green infrastructure and why do we need to retrofit our urban environment so badly? And then going through some of that evolution of green infrastructure projects from the early days in Portland, and then also work here more locally. And then some more theoretical or even more practical concepts, something called multiple shades of green, which we'll go into, and this concept of microgreening. And then the last thing is the idea of starting small but thinking big with ambitions as it relates to stormwater and retrofitting the urban context. So why do we need green infrastructure? I think it's best displayed again in pictures. And so here's an example of a Google Earth shot. And I like to show these kind of comparisons because this particular shot on the screen here is just outside a very busy metropolis area, a busy city. And what we have here is kind of a snapshot in time, I believe, and what the environment used to look like before we went through the process of urbanizing. And so we have tree cover, we have grass, we have tons of landscape, we have wetlands, we have everything that's making the component of a healthy watershed. This is actually just a couple miles outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you can see in this picture quite a different story, and really a story that's been taking place for a relatively short amount of time. When you think about that transition from the natural condition to the built environment, really within the last 150 years. And so it's easy to forget how much we've altered the hydrology and the natural landscape when we're just walking down the street, because we do see street trees and we do see smaller patches of landscape. But when you pull back out to the airplane level, it's amazing the contrast that's there. Here's another example here, the natural landscape, and it's downtown Houston. Again, these are I'm just pulling out of the city just a little bit, and it's a little bit of a snapshot in time. And it doesn't have to be, a very highly urbanized condition. Here's an example of here in the Central Valley here in California, and we have trees, and we've got some riparian conditions in through here. And then when we suburbanize that condition, granted, there's a little bit more landscape than we might find in an ultra-urban condition, but it's still greatly altered. a couple more examples, and it's not just here in the U.S. I mean, this is the condition everywhere across the world. The good news is that there's tons of different habitat out there. Sorry, let me back up. Let me just say that there's tons of different habitats, and the issue is that we are altering it. It doesn't matter what type of landscape it is, and we're replacing it with this condition. And the equation's pretty simple. Starting kind of from the left to the right, we've got high areas of impervious area. When it does rain, none of that water can get into the ground. It's quickly conveyed into an underground pipe conveyance system, and it's kind of taken out of sight, out of mind. And of course, the trash and the sediment and the pollution load is taken with it. And so you have a situation like this. This is actually a picture that I had taken in Washington, D.C. during a pretty strong storm event, where the street network is the conveyance system. Whereas in the natural environment, we do have this conveyance system in place, but it's not impervious. It is natural. There's tons of tree cover. And so what we're trying to do with the green infrastructure system is try to begin to mimic that natural condition. Now, in many ways, we're not going to be able to get back to that natural condition, but we can make very measurable strides to do that. And what I was about to say is that we have good news, is that we have a complete toolbox that we can explore to do exactly that, to start to repair their urbanized environment. So again, moving from left to right, we have pervious paving, we have stormwater swales, planters, rain gardens, curb extensions, and a relatively new concept called green gutters, which I'll get into a little bit. I'll show you some examples of each of these. So let's take a look at some of the retrofit projects back in the early 2000s. So this was one of the first Green Street retrofits that I had completed. This is in Portland. It's actually a street that's a block away from where I lived before I moved to Sacramento. And this is Northeast Siskiyou Street, and it's a kind of a typical Portland residential street. Real quiet. There's no real through traffic, and 28 feet from curb to curb, and the parking zone isn't heavily utilized. So the idea was to replace some of that parking zone with a pair of stormwater curb extensions, which is essentially just carving out 50 foot long by 7 foot wide swaths of asphalt, taking that out and replacing that with a landscape system that can then capture that stormwater along the curb line. And it's been a very strong success. I was just up in Portland just a couple weeks ago, and the street is performing still very, very well. It looks great. And with a lot of these very first stormwater Green Street retrofits, there's interpretive signage there that kind of explains, hey, this isn't your average street. This is a very new concept. Granted, this one is now 15 years old, but very, very successful. And it fits very well within the context of the neighborhood. And that's an important part of not just managing stormwater, but making sure that it's fitting contextually in its environment, whether it be a residential condition or an urban condition. And I'll show you examples of that. And so this is just a shot of the water that's entering one of those curb extensions during the storm event. And what happens is that cut there, we call it a curb cut, the water moves in, and then there's some check dams that slow that water down, just some rock check dams that hold the water back. And it takes a good 20 to 25 minutes for the point where the water enters this landscape until it ultimately overflows. And sometimes it never overflows. Sometimes it just goes into the ground pretty much immediately. It depends on the storm event. So that was great. That was a great example of a residential retrofit. There wasn't much risk for the city to take that on. What about a more downtown situation where you have a lot more complexity? And so this was a street example right next to Portland State University, Southwest 12th Avenue. And a little different condition. Now we have on-street parking, and we have a sidewalk zone and kind of an existing landscape space. We could do so much better in terms of an urban street than what we have here. Somebody gets out of their car in this situation, how do they even get to the sidewalk zone? Not that easy, much less trying to manage stormwater. It's not managed as it's just shown here. So what we did at the city is we introduced a series of planters. And now these are more urban condition. The idea is to take water in that 8 foot existing, so this is about 8 feet from the curb to the back of the sidewalk, we're reorganizing that space, that 8 feet, to allow for water to move from the street into these 4 stormwater planters. And what you see here is everything that we would need in a streetscape condition. We have street trees, we have adequate pedestrian maneuverability, because now we offset the stormwater planters about 3 feet so somebody can have their car door open, move into that, what we call an egress zone, and then have periodic pathways that lead to the actual sidewalk. So here's what these look like in action, and they're about 5 feet wide by about 17 feet long, each one of these planters, and there's 4 of them, like I said, in series. And so the very first planter gets hit with the most rainfall, and there's a trench drain that is essentially a channel with a metal cover that allows that water to move underneath that egress zone, but still allows people to actually walk over that space. The water fills up in the planters about 6 inches of depth, and within a couple of hours, it actually infiltrates back into the ground. And keep in mind that some of these early projects, actually all of them, were using pretty much the native soil condition. In this particular area of town, the soils were relatively free draining. We were getting infiltration rates of between half an inch to 2 inches per hour, just with the native soil. And so there wasn't a strong need to go in and super engineer the soils to have a gravel layer and under drain system. We knew that they were going to infiltrate adequately after a certain amount of time. And like I said before, each one of these early Green Street projects has an interpretive sign, and being right next to a public university, there was a lot of interest in this particular street. And so we would have professors and students walking by. Just to give you an idea of this is what it looked like when it was first planted. And this is what it looked like in 2012 before we gave these trees a little bit of a haircut. But I just wanted to re-emphasize that the idea of having trees in these conditions is not a bad thing. Actually, they're doing very, very well. So we've got a new tree here, about 2-inch caliper, and within a couple of years, it's about 5 years of growth. Now it's about 7-inch caliper tree, and now it's growing a little bit more. So that was an example of another technology using stormwater planters. The first one was curb extensions on northeast Siskiyou. This is another example of a different technology using rain gardens. This is Sandy Boulevard in Portland, Oregon, and for any of you that have ever been to Portland and driven down or walked down Sandy Boulevard, it's a wide arterial street that cuts through the city grid. And so what happens is that in many cases, as it's cutting through the grid, there's triangle spaces, these kind of leftover triangle spaces that were often just utilized as just empty kind of no man's land asphalt spaces. And they were too small to actually put a building on. And so the condition pretty much looked like this, where you've got, again, this is Sandy Boulevard, it's cutting through the grid. This is a side street. And so this triangle spaces are very, very inefficient use of space. It was very difficult for a pedestrian to actually get across these triangle spaces. So we were asked to provide some examples as to how to fix this situation. We couldn't do it for the entire context of the street, but we did it on 5 locations where we converted some of these triangle spaces of asphalt into rain gardens. So this is what it looks like essentially now, where what used to be all asphalt and concrete is now the home of a relatively large rain garden. And you can't see it that well, but stormwater enters from the far upper left-hand corner, and it moves through this landscape. There's a series of concrete check dams that slows that water down, and ultimately it would overflow into that circular overflow unit there. There's a more technical name for it, but I've actually never seen the water actually get into that. This landscape space is so big compared to the amount of water that it's taking in. I've never seen it actually overflow. But it shows you an example of how to boldly green the urban environment with rain gardens. This is another triangle space a couple of blocks up the street. What's different about a lot of these triangles is that the sidewalk is actually tilted towards the landscape, as opposed to in many of our streets, the sidewalk is tilted just towards the street curb. These are completely reversed, and so the water is now moving into the landscape. So I'm going to show you a lot of street projects, but the other thing that I'm very passionate about and love working on are school projects. So streets and schools. I've built a career off of doing those types of retrofits, and I just love it. This is an example in 2006 what Mount Tabor Middle School used to look like, and these were all south-facing classrooms, and this is the parking lot. It was the quote-unquote main entrance of the school. Everyone would drop off their kids and then move into the kind of a side door there. But it was really hot and really kind of stinky with all the vehicles moving around, and obviously a lot of impervious area. In fact, let's just say 100% impervious, because that's basically what it was. This is what the space looks like today with a 2,000 square foot rain garden, plus some bike parking for the students, and the trees have grown up quite a bit now. And when I did the redesign of this space, I only lost one parking space. So I think it was a pretty decent trade-off of functional parking versus landscape space. Now they have a very, very much cooler area in there, and then it manages those incredible amounts of stormwater. We have roughly 10,000 square feet of roof runoff that's going into the space, plus another 20,000 square feet of asphalt play area / parking lot that's going into the space. Show you a couple of pictures. That strong line that you see cutting through is actually in alignment with some of the downspouts from the building. Showing that no longer is this water just being taken underground into pipes. We've actually exposed it so people can actually see that, hey, this is our water, right? We don't need to hide it anymore. It's allowed to move on the surface from the roof and from concrete runnels into the landscape space. And after a rainfall, it's actually quite beautiful to see this water in place. And like I said, after a couple hours, that water is soaked into the ground. One of the more amazing things I think about this particular project is not so much visually seeing it, although it's powerful, but it's actually hearing the water from 4 different directions from the downspouts, the building downspouts. Hearing this water rush into the landscape spaces is pretty neat. So that was kind of a phase 1 approach to reducing the amount of impervious area at Mount Tabor Middle School. The rain garden that you just saw was in the upper right-hand corner. The parking lot needed a lot of help too, because it was inefficiently designed. The travel aisles were pretty oversized. The parking stalls themselves were oversized. So there was definitely room to trim out some of that asphalt area and to create a long stormwater swale / rain garden. And an amazing amount of space. And I actually, again, I think I lost maybe 2 parking spaces with this. And I didn't technically really need to lose them, but just to make the design a little bit more coherent, I did lose 2. And again, I think it's a pretty good trade-off. And so when we do get a whopper of a storm up there, the rain is moving through the rain garden space. There's a series, again, check dams and a controlled weir point that manages how much water and where the water is moving through. So you can see here, there's the concrete check dam, and then there's a plastic weir that's held just below the top of that concrete that controls exactly where I want that water to spill over as it overflows through the system. And within a day, that water is gone. So there was the parking lot. There was also the perimeter of the school as well. Simple ways, easy ways to retrofit the school. In this location, there was a series of downspouts. Because there was a basement next to the school itself, so we pulled the stormwater planter away about 8 to 10 feet to still allow for infiltration, but the water is moving through these concrete runnels into a series of planters. And when the overflow does occur, there's no piped overflow in this location. It just overflows over to the grass and then eventually makes its way down to the street level. But again, most of the water, I've yet to see these actually even overflow. So by the time I was doing a lot of work up in Portland, there was definitely a lot of interest in Northern California to do this work as well. And pretty much in 2008, that's where I was getting quite a few phone calls to look at how could we do this type of work here in Northern California. So in 2008, I was asked to look at the retrofit of the Brisbane City Hall parking lot. And this is an example of what the space looked like before. So the City Hall is kind of that rectangular building, and the screen there. This is the parking lot, incredibly inefficiently designed in terms of what we could use that parking for, allocate space for it. Pretty much impervious. This is what it looks like today with about an 1,800 square foot rain garden, much better pedestrian travel, and I didn't lose any parking spaces at all with this retrofit. We actually brought the parking spaces up to a normal dimension rather than having travel aisles and stalls be oversized. And just that switch in design was allowed to create the space for this rain garden to occur. And so the plant palette you can see is changed dramatically from the Pacific Northwest to Northern California. We have much more drought-tolerant plant material represented here. And this is an example of the rain garden in place. I don't have any good rain pictures, of course, because we haven't had that much rain in the last couple of years, and I'm not there often enough to actually take pictures when it's raining pretty good, but from my understanding, it's working very, very well. This is a picture from a tour that was happening there. I wanted to talk about this particular project, moving back up to Portland, because I think it's an important one, and that it's looking at not just the ultra-urban condition. What can you do in the more rural condition as well? And so this is an example of a street just south of Portland in a city called Milwaukie, Oregon, called Logus Road. And it's right next to an existing school, an elementary school, and heavily traveled in terms of both cars, but also kids with bikes and kids walking to school, but they have no real infrastructure there. And this street would flood quite often. This is what it looks like today with what I'm calling a green gutter, which is essentially a very narrow landscape strip, and it's not very deep in terms of accepting water, maybe 2 or 3 inches deep of water that moves into this landscape space. But because it's so continuous and so long, there's plenty of capacity there to accept this water. So the layperson would probably look at this and not even know that this is a functional stormwater facility because it's so shallow. Just to give you a couple of other pictures here, this is the perspective of what it looked like before. This is what it looks like now with that real narrow landscape strip, the green gutter aspect. And now they have a sidewalk zone as well, which is pervious concrete. So it's a good example of not just tackling the water portion, but actually just overall safety from a mobility standpoint. Good project. Now, the flip side, what can we do in the really urban condition? And this is in downtown Portland. This was a plan that I developed with many others in 2009. And this is Southwest Montgomery Green Street, very near Southwest 12th Avenue. And this was, the charge on this project was how green of a street can we really make Southwest Montgomery in terms of not just stormwater, but how can we make it the most, the best pedestrian space, the best bicycle space as possible. And so it looked at about 11 blocks from the Willamette Hills all the way down to the river, but specific focus through Portland State University. And what we introduced was something called a stormwater spine, which is a relatively continuous 5-foot wide planter that would go from street block to street block, and water would just keep moving down the spine. And its design would change a little bit with the character of the street, but for the most part, it was having this one long continuous green space. And again, not just looking at the stormwater piece, but looking at how can we make this street better for all modes of transportation, whether it be light rail, increasing the sidewalks from 12 feet wide to 17 feet wide to allow for better pedestrian space, many more bike racks, and more places to actually sit. And then even one of the blocks has their on-street parking all dedicated towards electrical vehicle charging stations. So this is still just in concept form. We did build 2 blocks out of this plan, but for the most part, it's still in just concept. But we were able to kind of understand, well, how much water can we actually managed annually on this street if we do all the retrofit things that we want to do, and it's just shy of about 2 million gallons of stormwater runoff per year. One particular block looking at a fairly bold retrofit of the space. Right now it's pretty much all impervious. This is the way we carve up the different catchment areas of the street. So it's looking at, okay, well, maybe the stormwater spine to the upper portion of the slide is taking a good 9,300 square feet, but we have these smaller chunks of landscape as well that can manage water. It's not just the stormwater spine. So how can we divide this up accordingly? And like I said, we've only implemented 2 of the blocks, but we've done a pretty good job with it so far. This is the space of one of the blocks in 2009, and it was kind of a mess, this space. It was right next to the Portland State University Student Memorial Union and another busy hall there. And it was a delivery zone. There were parents dropping off students there. Very difficult to maneuver. And of course, it was 100% impervious. All the water was being channeled to the center of this street, and it was picked up into the drains and sent directly into the Willamette River, untreated. This is what the space looks like now with that 5-foot-long continuous stormwater spine moving through the block here. And interestingly enough is that what you see here is not an infiltrative landscape because there actually are basements below ground here. And so we weren't able to actually infiltrate water into the ground. So this is a 5-foot deep by 5-foot wide box. And there's a gravel layer and an underdrain inside there. But with that said, we're still getting quite a bit of water being managed through here. It's slowing that water down. It's treating it before it's getting to the river. And we packed this space full of trees with the idea of trying to kind of force infiltration or almost fake infiltration by evapotranspiration with the tree roots. So I'm very big on trees, if you haven't noticed that by now. But when we have a condition that is not infiltrative like this, we're trying to absorb as much water through plant material as possible. So this is just some views of that space. Water is moving through the stormwater spine, and then there's a series of metal grates that still allows people and bikes to actually move across that spine without, there's no breakup of the landscape space. This is all one continuous space for stormwater management. And then it's not just taking water from the street surface, but there's a couple of downspouts from the building and the sky bridge there that are allowed to move into the landscape space. And it does it in a pretty nice way, I think. This is the one area where we don't have a sign that explains what this street is. And I think a lot of people are confused that this is actually, like I said before, a functional stormwater facility. They just view it as a regular landscape. And I think that's probably a good thing, is that the more that these look like just regular landscapes that just happen to take water in, I think the more successful they are. The more that they look like a pit or super deep facility, I think the less, from a public awareness and aesthetic standpoint, it's not as strong. So that was one block. The next block is just 2 blocks down from the previous, and this is the Urban Center Plaza, 100% impervious with a series of fountains that were there. We wanted to surgically cut in landscape space that could manage stormwater without messing up the programming of the space, because there's graduations that happen in this space, a lot of pedestrian movement. So we had to be very, very strategic in how we carved in our landscape. And so this is the concept plan, where there's a series of planters on the periphery of the plaza space. And what used to be bricks going all the way up to these fountain walls is now landscape. It's about 5 feet wide, again, kind of that stormwater spine idea. But in this particular location, which is nice, is that we have this element of grade change. So we have planters that are cascading down, and of course the water is going to do that too. So, and then we introduced quite a bit of seating area. And this used to be a staircase, but it's now kind of the low point of the site, and water is allowed to collect in this upper area, and then it fills up to a certain depth, and then it spills over into the lower rain garden. This is what it looks like in 2015 compared to when it was first planted. Again, those trees have grown up pretty nicely in this space. And this is what it looked like before that green gutter, or excuse me, the stormwater spine was introduced. This is what it looks like now. There's so much landscape here to compare to how much water is moving through the space that I rarely get an opportunity to see water moving down through the Cascades, but it has happened quite a bit. It's just a good overall project that shows, you know, we can retrofit these types of situations in pretty much any context we want. This is an example of a recent project that I worked on in San Mateo County. A very, very rewarding project because it's a school project, but it's looking not just at the school grounds, but it's looking at the peripheral streets as well. And this is part of a joint effort between the Safe Routes to School project, as well as the school itself, Laurel Elementary School. This is what the street looked like back last year, and this is what it looks like today with a curb extension that is now put into place, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's actually a new pedestrian crossing that wasn't there before that allows kids to move through the stormwater curb extension. There's a trench drain that allows water to move through, lets water move through, but the kids can still walk over it. So this is what it looks like with water in it. But that was just the street aspect, but we took a very bold step of what can we do with the school's parking lot and the building water as well. And there's the multi-purpose room that's there in the kind of upper left-hand corner. We tried to, again, surgically cut in landscape space where there was almost all impervious area. There's a kind of a semicircular rain garden / seat wall piece in the lower left-hand side that's taking a good portion of the MPR building runoff, and whatever runoff isn't going to that space is going into a triangular rain garden in the center of the parking lot. And then whatever overflows from that is then moved into a stormwater planter more on the right-hand side. So just showing you some pictures of this is right after it was installed. This is kind of this terminus planter where there's quite a bit of management that's happened upstream. This is kind of the most downstream area of management. This is the triangular rain garden that's in the center of the parking lot. And again, this is all cut in. This used to all be hardscape. And this is the semicircular rain garden aspect where the kids can hang out. This is their drop-off zone. And it's also there to manage water from the roof. You can see a trench drain that's leading the water from the downspout into that rain garden. And then having a good interpretive sign is always important, especially on kind of new projects like this. And I have to say, I've been out to this particular site numerous times, and when it does rain, it's quite beautiful to see the different colors of the plant material contrasting with the water. It's great. So that's kind of an overview of a lot of the projects. So some of my favorite projects, there's more, but I just wanted to highlight some of those because they pick up on different technologies, whether it be a planter, a rain garden, a green gutter, stormwater curb extensions, a lot of different tools. What I wanted to talk about next was this concept of multiple shades of green, and it's pretty much regulated to the street environment, but I think it has wide-reaching applicability. And the idea is that when we're looking at the term green street, it doesn't have to be a street that is just full of bells and whistles in terms of how much water we're managing. There's multiple shades of green, and I think this is very important to talk about these different levels, with level 1 being kind of the least green, but it's still important, with level 5 being what we might call the most green. So level 1 is just simply saying, in our urban environment, let's just try to get more landscape in the ground. It doesn't have to actively accept stormwater in a swale or a planter or a rain garden, but just putting in more and more landscape when we can. And there's plenty of opportunity to do exactly that. Number 2 is building on that approach, but if we have more landscape, then actively trying to get more tree canopy into the mix. And so we're slowly trying to build up the level of green with this. Level 3 is doing everything with level 1 and 2, but then allowing that new landscape to actually take the water, to accept the water in the form of a swale or a rain garden. Level 4 is doing everything we can do with level 1, 2, and 3, but going beyond the idea of just stormwater management and suggesting that maybe we should be focusing on alternative transportation as well, allowing the street to have more capacity for people to bike or ride there or walk. With the idea is that cars do pollute, obviously, and the more we can build up infrastructure that's non-polluting, the more green and the better the stormwater is with that. And the level 5 is suggesting that not just looking at the street as well, but the surrounding buildings. Can the entire site be functioning as one kind of green space? And I'll show you some examples of that. Level 5 is a very difficult level to achieve. In fact, I haven't built an actual project. When I say I'm showing you examples, it's still in concept form. But say taking water from the building and actually putting it out into the right-of-way, or vice versa, allowing the right-of-way water to move into the private realm, where there's not this separation between public and private. We just have landscape space, and it's managing water accordingly. So here's some examples of these different levels, and I get to travel quite a bit, and one of the favorite places that I like to go to is Chicago, because their streets are really, really pretty. This is either State Street or Michigan, and this could have been paved. In fact, it probably was. I think it was paved from building face all the way to the street curb, but there was an idea several years ago that maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we can actually create more landscape space to better the overall pedestrian experience in Chicago downtown. And so these are planted primarily with annual plants, so when the winter comes, they die back. But think about this for a second. If this was paved all the way from the building to the face of the curb, that's 100% imperviousness. This is essentially taking out half of that impervious area and allowing water to move from the sky, from the rain, into this landscape space. So in broad terms, it's basically reducing the amount of stormwater by roughly 50%, just by taking out some of that kind of excess fat. Now, obviously, people can move through the space, and they do. Here's some other examples of artwork in the landscape space. People can move through this and enjoy it, and we're still getting stormwater benefit by reducing the amount of impervious area. You don't have to go all the way to Chicago to see this. We have it right around the corner here at the Justice Building here in Sacramento. This is a level 1 Green Street. So this could have been paved all the way to the sidewalk edge. And it's not. There is landscape space, and actually could very well be a level 2 street, because actually there's quite a bit of tree canopy there. And it doesn't have to be actual in-ground landscape space is what I'm talking about. Here's an example in Mountain View on Castro Street, where the landscape is actually in the form of above-ground planters. And again, this is still providing stormwater benefit, as well as creating a unique aesthetic for the street itself. So these are above-ground planters. The water could easily fall from the sky into this area. This is an example in San Francisco that Walter Hood, landscape architect, had put into place, and a wonderful example of above-ground landscape that, again, is a level 1 Green Street. How about this example? This could have just as easily been paved, and while I don't necessarily approve of it all being just lush turf grass, but this is in Barcelona. If this was planted in a different type of situation, this is the idea of where we need the paving, let's have the paving. If we don't need it, let's take it out and put in landscape space. It's only going to do better things for our urban environment. Now, the level 2 is obviously, like I said before, is introducing more street tree canopy. And this is a classic example of doing exactly that in Aspen. But we also have examples here in Sacramento as well. This is right next to the convention center, where great example of young plane trees that are gracing the street. You can see the relatively width of the street is pretty small. There's ample landscape space. I wish this was done, 20 years ago, when we knew a little bit more about stormwater, we would have not lawn there, but actual stormwater plantings. But this is excellent. This is excellent, excellent. Residential streets. This is a great example in Portland, where the street is only 24 feet wide. In some cases, they're narrower than that, and you still have two-way traffic and parking on both sides and ample room for landscape and street trees. Back to Chicago. Some more ideas that the street trees don't have to necessarily be planted in the street, in the planting strip, but even in the front yards. Or what about beyond the street itself? What about those strip malls that are gracing many of our arterial streets? I had fun with this one. This is just an example in San Mateo County of a strip mall that I took the liberty of altering the parking lot code and put in the exact same amount of parked cars you see here are represented here with more capacity, but look at the amount of landscape space that I was able to yield just by going through a design exercise. In fact, so much space that we could actually infill new buildings into the mix. Now, the level 3 is what we described earlier with a lot of the retrofit projects. It's just actively managing water. So we've seen projects like this, 12th Avenue, Mount Tabor. But the level 4 Green Street is one that's doing everything we can do with stormwater, but also utilizing a better role for alternative transportation. This is a great picture of a development in Stockholm, Sweden. And this is a green gutter, actually, planted with sedum. The water is moving through this multi-use bike path / pedestrian path into the green gutter. Great example of a level 4 Green Street, as well as the Southwest Montgomery Green Street. Or how about this example in just a sketch of El Camino Real in San Mateo County, where you've got quite a few pedestrians and bicyclists that run up and down through the street, and we have this kind of concrete area that's used for bus turnout, but it's not really a travel lane. It's kind of, again, a no man's land situation. How about switching that out into something like this, where you have a series of stormwater planters and a separated bike lane, and then even more separated for the pedestrian realm too. This is, I think, highly conceivable. You could definitely do this if we have the means to do it. Here's an example of a residential street where the bike infrastructure is there. It just needs some more greening. So if we were to do something like this, we're taking away that parking zone that's not utilized at all, wasted space, get rid of it. Utilize emphasize the bike lane, emphasize the pedestrian realm, and then have this green condition that exists there. Lastly, the level 5 Green Street or site is very difficult to achieve. This was a concept plan of a project near the Southwest Montgomery Green Street, and there was a big development project that was planned at the terminus of this Green Street, and the idea was the building was going to manage its own. It was a net zero building with everything: net zero energy, net zero water, net zero waste. And we wanted to incorporate the idea of a level 5 Green Street, which suggests that there's no separation between kind of the public water and the private water. Water from the building could go into the street right-of-way, and vice versa. The right-of-way water can be moved into the landscape system. And by doing that, it just combines the efficiency of the landscape to manage water from whatever source is nearby. This is kind of an idea of what it could have looked like. Ultimately, it actually wasn't able to go past the concept phase. But there's very, very, I think strong reasoning as to why we should kind of not allow that separation between the public and private realm be a limiting factor with managing stormwater. There's so much space out there if we're able to combine landscape resources to make that happen. Moving through these kind of different concepts, multiple shades of green, I want to talk about microgreening. And this is one that I've been quite interested in the last, say, 2 years or so, is the idea of that, we're managing water at such a big level. And it's important to, I remember back in high school, we were asked to problem solve, working backwards, working tiny, working big. And so this is an example of taking a larger problem of stormwater management and focusing in really, really tight to think about managing water almost from the droplet level and allowing that to then kind of inform bigger ideas. So I look at the urban landscape as a design model. And what I mean by that is that there are examples, and I hope when you go outside today, you'll see examples of this, is where the urban environment is actually breaking down. The infrastructure that we have, the paved infrastructure, is breaking down, and we have a lot of cracks in the pavement. Some of them are formalized, like this is a score line between two pieces of pavement, where there's just enough ground contact within the crack system that it can manage water. And I was surprised at exactly how much water could be managed. And this light bulb came off in my head when I was visiting my family in Nashville, Tennessee, a couple years ago. And a big thunderstorm went through, and it was a hot day, a hot summer day. And so a lot of after the thunderstorm went through and the rainfall stopped, there was a lot of evaporation that occurred. But there was a building downspout that kept on bleeding water into this parking lot. And there was a crack in the parking lot, and I was watching this water, and bam, it went right into the ground. And an amazing amount of water. This water kept on going for a long time, and it was managed within this really small amount of space. And it really got me thinking as to maybe there is a role for this type of microgreening or water crack technology that can, I need a better term, I know, but this is an amazing thing to have happen. And it's largely accidental. This is another example over at UC Davis where I teach, and this is actually just water that was over-irrigated. There were some above-ground planters, and the water was moving through the sidewalk zone, and it hit an expansion joint that had contact with the ground. And again, that water moved right into the ground. And so I started taking pictures, and I hate to say it, I've got probably 300 pictures of cracks and landscape moving through cracks. This is an example in Portland of my street. It's a 90-year-old street, 100-year-old street, I forgot. Landscape is moving into this street environment. And it's beautiful. It's like green veins moving all through the street. And it's pretty much accidental pervious paving, but it does it in such a beautiful way. And it doesn't have to be kind of this irregular look. It can be more formalized. So here's some moss in Davis, actually. This is in the East Street Plaza in Davis, California, in the springtime. Or at a schoolyard. Or this is the interface between a gutter pan of a street and the concrete gutter pan and the asphalt, where this quote-unquote weed has crept in. But you can imagine that water's moving through the asphalt, and it's going to hit that landscape, and it's going to do something, and it's going to go in the ground. More examples. This is another example in Davis where just that thin interface between the gutter pan and the asphalt is creating a landscape, and a viable landscape, I think, for stormwater management. I almost want to get out there with a saw cut machine and start cutting lines into the street so it can even be more formalized. And it turns out somebody's actually done this. And this is a design example in Barcelona where, again, this could have been paved from the building face all the way to the street, but the sidewalk zone is maintained for a certain distance, continuous, and then these kind of more half landscape, half pavement areas are introduced where the pedestrian travel isn't as robust. Really nice example. And so I look at these types of projects and I try to think, well, where is that applicable here in the United States? And we're actually looking at doing something like this, very similar, at a street project in Washington, D.C. This is a kind of a residential street, is taking that parking zone of the street and introducing kind of formal lines of landscape that it allows the water to move into the ground. So I want to further this experimentation, not just with the streets, but maybe parking lots as well. Where can we cut in these areas of landscape to make water management happen on the micro level. The last thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of just starting small and thinking big, kind of similar to the idea of micro greening, but with actual projects. And I wanted to highlight this particular project at UC Davis that I actually implemented with my students, not this last year, but the year before. And it's a retrofit on the UC Davis campus, and it's along California Avenue. And the project had several goals. We wanted to look at retrofitting an existing lawn space that could reduce irrigation, manage stormwater runoff, provide some really valuable hands-on learning for landscape architecture students in the program, and really demonstrate some simple and cost-effective ways to implement green infrastructure, because that's on everybody's mind. How can we make this happen and make it happen in a very effective, cost-effective way? But then when I think about start small, think big, integrate the project into the larger campus retrofit effort. So this project is right in the heart of the Davis campus. This is what the streetscape looked like before. So it was all irrigated lawn up to the back of the sidewalk. Our idea was to remove about 1,000 square feet of this lawn space. And by doing so, we're going to reduce the overall irrigation load on the campus by a little bit, but also introduce a rain garden as well in between two existing mature trees. So this is kind of a real simplistic plan view of this space. There's California Avenue. Robbins Hall is the actual building that it fronts. And the idea is to intercept water as it's moving from left to right via a trench drain that allows the water to move underneath that sidewalk zone and into a rain garden on the back side of the sidewalk. But what you don't know is that this project is part of a larger effort along California Avenue to retrofit the entire street from Hutchinson Boulevard to Russell Boulevard within the campus. And so this is an actual plan view of the graphic that I produced a couple years ago for the campus that shows the retrofit of California Avenue. It's not just the street. It looks a little bit beyond California Avenue as well. And everything you can see there in kind of that dark blue/purple, that's all stormwater related landscape that would be retrofitted into the mix. But this is just a small effort that myself and the students wanted to take on to help inform that overall plan. So this is the before conditions. Thirsty lawn, very little plant diversity. And then when it does rain, a lot of water comes down this street. About 9,000 square feet of water is generated. And right about where the 9,000 square feet text is where we're going to cut that concrete out and allow the water to move into the space. If we didn't, all that water would move into the existing storm drain system. So we want to try to intercept that before it even happens. So this was the beginning date, April 28th, 2015. We decided about how far out we wanted to remove the lawn. It was kind of a function of the existing irrigation system that was there, where the heads where we could alter the irrigation. And then the fun part, removing the lawn. And we did this all by hand. They did it mostly all by hand. I was out there for a little bit, but these guys worked really, really hard. It was a handful, maybe 12 students. Day after day, chunk after chunk of lawn removed by hand. We tried to save the smaller existing tree, and it was at ground level, but we had to recess the grade for the rain garden to exist, try to pop the tree out, put it back in. It was in really high, we lost the tree, unfortunately. But we plan on replanting it. But all the dirt that you see here, again, is removed just by hand shovels, and these are the students grading the rain garden. And what you see here is a template that I gave to them with foam core that's an exact 4-to-1 slope for the side slope of and they would just scrape that grade along to achieve the right grade that I wanted. And then switching out the irrigation system from a spray system to a more efficient drip system. This is a little bit different product by Hunter that looks at wrapping the drip pipe with a fabric that helps wick the water away from the actual drip holes so that when the water moves through, it's giving more even distribution between the drip emitters rather than just allowing that water to move straight into the ground. So interesting, and it's working pretty well. So we're laying out the drip lines. It's nothing that precise. And then we wanted the students to insert a paver pathway as well as part of their construction experience. And so they're doing exactly that. And a lot of these students have never worked in construction before. It was a great opportunity for them to be out in the field. Granted, it was some really hot days there, but this is where the paver system's in place. This is planting day. Take into account we're planting in not a great time of year, June 2015. We didn't get into the major heat yet, but we were scared about the plant material, but we were really relying on our drip irrigation system. We put down some mulch, and take note, the rain garden has been mulched with a pea gravel rather than a floatable material, organic mulch. Action, and then you'll see why I do that is because when we have a situation where we're taking a large amount of water into a rain garden, that mulch material will float up and has some potential for clogging. I use pea gravel as a pretty effective mulch. It's about 2 inches thick. It retains the moisture and it doesn't float. So this is what it looked like when we ended the planting in June. And we came back in November and we didn't lose that much plant material. I think we lost maybe 1 or 2 plants. But what was the missing piece? We still hadn't cut the curb to allow the stormwater to move into the landscape space. That was a task that went beyond the skill set of the students. So the UCD campus grounds crew actually helped us out with that. And we began to, I just wanted to show that you can't see that pea gravel anymore. Now it's just all plant material. Okay, so December 2015, everybody's on holiday break. We cut the curb for the trench drain to move through, but we got some rain. We got some storms that moved in, and so it interrupted our construction quite a bit. So this facility was live, even though we didn't have an actual trench drain. Water's moving in, and I was happy to know that the water infiltrated really, really well. And again, keep in mind, this is a simple rain garden. There wasn't any soil amendment at all. We were working just with the native soil that was there. And so it was a really good project. So now things dried out a little bit. We can have the trench drain installed. It's installed now. This is in February. Now we have a true kind of finished product where the water is moving down the street and there's a 3-foot wide curb cut, relatively ample. A lot of times the curb cuts are relatively small, 1 foot. I like to make them as big as possible and make sure that water is getting into the space. And I should also note that this is a very unique situation where there is no real outflow. The inflow is the outflow. So what happens is that when the water moves into the rain garden, it fills up to a depth of about 6 inches. It has nowhere else to go. So the water can't get in. It just bypasses along the face of the curb. And whatever water we can't get in, we'll just continue to move through. Again, in wintertime. But after a couple months, we started getting some blooms and the plant material is growing up. And this is right before UC Davis' famous picnic day in April. I'd taken these pictures of the rain garden. So this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looked like this year for picnic day in April. We completed the project. I'd say, by the time groundbreaking to completion, it took a year, which is a little bit more than one would want it to do, but a really good project. And again, this was just one, I don't know if doesn't look like my pointers, but this is just one little piece of the puzzle that the students help implement that will inform this larger picture for the UC Davis campus. So with that, we went through a lot of different topics and 173 slides. I hope this was helpful to visualize and provide some inspiration of what we can do to help retrofit the urban environment with green infrastructure. Thank you.
Do we have any questions in the room?
Really good talk. I was curious about the schools. How did the schools come with the funding, and how did you select the schools and approach them and kind of get the project to completion?
The first school up in Portland was Mount Tabor Middle School, and the city of Portland actually funded that project because it was in an area that the neighborhood experienced local basement flooding. It wasn't because of too much water coming in from their basements from the outside. It was actually the city's sewer pipes that were surcharging. And the city wanted to work with the school because it had so much impervious area. So the city actually footed the bill to implement the project with the understanding that the school would take over maintenance after 10 years. Just happens to be that for Mount Tabor Middle School, that 10-year period is now up. So the maintenance responsibility is now transferred from the city to the school. For the school example in San Mateo County for Laurel Elementary, that again was a kind of a joint funding effort between the school district as well as the county itself and the city of San Mateo, because there was lots of different stormwater facilities in different realms. There was the street, so the city of San Mateo allowed for some money to be put forth for the street. But the main funder for that particular project was San Mateo County, and they get their funding from a wide variety of sources. They have vehicle license fees that helps with funding of stormwater projects and other sources as well. So there's, I would say, very, very little funding for the projects that I have worked on actually come from the schools themselves. That does happen. Maybe there's some matching funds that occur, but a lot of it is from a specific agency, a public agency. I'm trying to think, because it was several years ago, as to how it was initiated. I think it was the realization that the county wanted to do something with respect to the Safe Routes to Schools program, and there was an interest to find some really good candidate schools that could help with that effort to really focus on the Safe Routes to Schools and look at the street right-of-way, but then what could be done on the adjacent school property. But I can't recall any specific. You may want to contact San Mateo County Water Pollution Prevention Program. They could probably tell you exactly, okay, well, this is how this really started.
Sorry, I'll use the mic. How do you feel about people who are installing artificial turf versus putting concrete?
Oh, that is a question I haven't been asked before. You know, I believe in a natural approach to pretty much anything, any landscape. So I don't necessarily think that installing artificial turf is any better than having concrete. I have yet to work on a project that actually uses that and collects the runoff, underground with a pipe with a underdrain system and then manage it. I guess I don't know what my take is on it, but I would rather see regular landscape go in rather than anything artificial.
I saw a lot of tiered designs in your photos, and it relied a lot on overflow from one area to another. And I was wondering, how much supplemental irrigation do you expect in those kinds of designs where you're relying on a certain amount of rainfall to hit everything? And do you design so that those places that get less water are more drought tolerant or need less water, et cetera?
So very specific to the design, if you've got an area that's a little bit higher than one down, 20 feet down, is that what you mean? Is this one getting a little bit more irrigation than the other? Not so much. I pretty much, when I'm designing a project here in Northern California or anywhere in California, I'm assuming that these facilities are pretty much dry the majority of the year, 10 months out of the year. And then when we do get the rainfall that happens, it's adaptable to accept that rainfall. So The irrigation regimen between one part of the site and another is pretty much the same, within reason, unless there's a big grade change between the two. Then maybe looking at something where the lower area might be a little bit different irrigation than the upper area. But I do rely on supplemental irrigation here in the valley and even in the Bay Area as well, just to help these plants along through an establishment period. So I don't just kind of blanketly say, you don't need an irrigation system at all. You need the irrigation system much like you would an infant. You're just not going to cut them off first couple of years of life. You get them going, and then hopefully they are able to go on their own after a while. The true is with the plant material as well. If we're choosing the plant material wisely, then after a while, they'll be able to adapt to a lower irrigation threshold. The Pacific Northwest, a little bit different, and I know that's not the focus area through here, but a lot of those early projects didn't receive any sort of irrigation at all. And so they get a lot of rainfall in the wintertime, and in the summertime, believe it or not, it's pretty dry up there. It won't rain for 4 months or so. They're kind of left to their own, but it's cooler. So,
how do you deal with the long-term maintenance of the rain gardens and the soils?
well, each site is pretty different in terms of its maintenance regimen. At the school sites, usually if you're out and maintaining them on a quarterly basis, so that might be some weed removal, checking in on plant material to see if it's still growing okay, clearing out some debris that might be in front of a curb cut to make sure that the water can move through. Every 3 months, if you could have a crew there to look after those kind of checking off the box of these different things, that's usually enough to maintain the overall health of a project. Some projects need a little bit more help with maintenance than others, and I'm thinking specifically of street conditions where you may have a street that has a lot of street tree canopy and a lot of leaf drop. And so when it rains, that leaf material will get deposited into the very first section of, say, a curb extension. And there may need to be more active maintenance to make sure that you're getting water into these facilities than you would another street that maybe doesn't have as much material that's deposited on the street. So it's very site-specific. I know the Southwest 12th Avenue project, that very first urban condition, Green Street, I know that for the first couple of years, they actually went out during the winter months and cleaned out the leaf debris because there's so much leaf drop every 2 months. They just had to pull that material away from the inlets to allow the water to move in. Some streets you may not have to do that. But I think an overall good rule of thumb is to have a crew go out every quarter, and they don't necessarily have to do any work, but they're there to look to see if there's anything that needs attention. And I think that's a pretty good schedule to keep.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. They're not related. One is a little off topic. I wonder if you had incorporated any recycled water into any of your projects. And the other one is if you were funding your project with greenhouse gas reduction fund and it was dependent on the greenhouse gas emissions, would you do something different and would you modify the project? Have you guys thought about that at all?
I haven't thought too much on the latter, and the latter part of the question. The first question with using recycled water, I haven't had a project that's done that, but I know that there's many, many projects that have, and that's definitely the trend, and it's almost the requirement if you can do that, to do exactly that. Special requirements as to how you use that water in the landscape, but I think being able to use recycled water is definitely the way to go. But I haven't come across a project that I have designed that has done that yet. One more?
For your level 5 design, where you incorporate public and private kind of properties, what do you find are the impediments in making those designs happen?
Well, I think that there's definitely just kind of that imaginary line that's there, that people want to separate that public water versus the private water. And some of it's practical, where you've got, let's say, a condition where you have a shared landscape that's allowing public water to go into a private landscape system. But what happens if there's a gas spill on the street and that water is then moved into the private realm? So I think there's just kind of like the incidental things that come up that people focus on that helps not allow this to happen. A lot of the impediment also is that there's so much impervious area within the right-of-way that there may just not be enough space to even manage it within the private realm. There's just not enough room. So people tend to shy away from it from that perspective. I think there's more applicability and more potential for the idea of reversing it, where you can take private water and actually manage it in the public realm, where there's and maybe there's some actual incentives that can make that happen. And I guess that's the last thing, is that what's the incentive for somebody to do that? There may not be that many for that to happen.
I just had a couple questions. One is, how do you determine plant selection? And is it mostly native landscaping, or how did you determine that? And the other is kind of piggybacking on this last question, which is, do you find it's a problem for water from the streets, for instance, that's picking up contamination, oil or whatever from the streetways, to be filtered into the side areas of landscaping?
Yeah, the latter part of the question, that's been studied for a number of years, and a lot of the first Green Street projects in Portland and other places, they've been looking at the plant health and the soil over time to see if there's any sort of toxic buildup. But what they're finding is that there is buildup of material, but it's never reaching a threshold that would be concerning towards human health or animal health. There has been some street projects in Portland where it's flagged a little bit of like plant health, that it's been, that bar has been raised up enough to where, geez, that might be harmful to the plants. But in observation and looking at the plant material, it doesn't seem to be affecting it at all. So pretty much the result and the conclusion has been that for all the projects that have been built, there hasn't been any adverse like toxicology or anything like that that's occurred. And a lot of the buildup of sediment and pollutant load is pretty much kept within the first couple of inches of the soil. So if there was ever a need to remove that material, it could be easily done. I haven't seen a project that's actually done that because of the purpose of trying to remove contaminated soil from, say, street runoff. There has been the need to remove the sediment just because it's just built up over time, but not because of the constituents in the soil itself. For the plant material, my planting philosophy is to use plants that work really well for ultra-urban conditions, that are really tough plants that can handle drought, they can handle inundation. They are primarily evergreen, so that even in the winter months they can transpire and uptake moisture, so they're not a lot of, maybe I'll have about 20% deciduous versus 80% evergreen plant material. So I do use a lot of natives, but I'm not afraid to use adaptable ornamentals as well, as long as they are plant material. It's plant material that can perform in really tough conditions. What I experienced early on in Portland when I used plant material, and even here as well, is that they love the conditions so much that they grow up really, really quick. And it actually requires more maintenance from an urban design standpoint because they're growing up this tall and they're thick. So I use material that is not going to require as much maintenance as a lot of natives do. Now, that's not the case with all natives. Like I said, I do use a lot of natives that are more lower growing material. And the last thing about plant selection is that, and you probably saw on the slides there, is that when I design facilities, they're very, very well planted. They're in a density that's really, really thick, with the idea that it's going to collect trash. It's going to collect sediment really, really effectively. So it's not one plant here and the next plant is 3 or 4 feet down. I really pack in the plant material so that it can go through that process of breaking down material, pollutants, and then transpire the water. So high density of planting, mostly evergreen. Yes, native, but I'm not afraid to use ornamentals that are adaptable for the condition as well. Oh, great question. 95% retrofit, 5% new design. I'm not sure why that is. I just come across these projects that they want to try to solve a specific problem about removing that gray space again and supplement with the green space. I would love to work on new development projects, because my gosh, they would be so much easier knowing that I can choose where utility lines are or where the landscape is, and I don't have to fight for space so much. I can actually plan for certain things, as opposed to the retrofit, which is a lot of, spatial competition. So, yeah, majority of my work is retrofit work.
Follow up on that, cost differential between a retrofit and a new design. I'm assuming that a new design may be a lower cost threshold, but just curious.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely lower costs, but not by too much. And it kind of depends on what the existing condition is for the retrofit. Say, for instance, the UC Davis example, where that was just pretty much lawn and landscape. Not, obviously you're replacing something that's there, but it's not a huge expenditure to go through that. We didn't move any utility lines, as opposed to in a street where you're taking out asphalt and a lot of concrete, and maybe you have to alter a utility line or two. That's when the costs tend to go up. So that actually brings up a good point. A lot of the retrofits that you saw in the presentation, even the ones in Portland, there was removal of asphalt, but we didn't really move the existing utilities at all. And some of them, we didn't touch it at all. And so that keeps the cost of the retrofit down quite a bit more than it would be if you had to really alter a lot of the infrastructure that's there. I think that makes the case even more for why aren't we doing this more in new development, because the cost is so much more cheaper than having to go in and take out something that's already been built up over time. I don't think that there's actually a number that says, okay, well, here's new construction, here's retrofit, and this is the cost differential between the two, because there's just too many variables between the two.
In the example of your level 5 project, what prevented it from going from concept to execution?
It was a project that was voted down by the state legislature.
Did you run into other barriers or hurdles in your other projects as well that you guys had to overcome?
Give me an example. What kind of barriers?
Whether it would be like an example of legislature, or the public didn't want to lose their street parking, for some example. Like, was there any backlash to slow your process down?
Yes and no. It's highly project and location specific. There have been street projects where there has been resistance from taking out parking spaces and converting that into landscape space. And those are areas that are really heavily parked areas. I've been trying to come up with some, again, problem solving, some designs that maybe utilize grates over landscapes so that people can park their cars over a viable landscape system when we're really competing for space. That's an example of taking a public concern about, and that's very common, that people want to have that parking space, especially if you're in a retail area, but they don't want to lose that space for landscape, of trying to problem solve and be able to to utilize both conditions, having a walkable, drivable surface, but having stormwater management on the bottom level of it. A lot of times I haven't really received that much resistance from projects in terms of what they're losing to compare to what they're gaining. People generally see these as amenities. There's a lot of questions about it, like who's going to maintain the landscape? Is it going to be myself? Is it going to myself? I say the homeowner or the business owner, or is it going to be the city? So there's more questions that there are resistance, because I see that people see the benefit of doing this type of work, but it's still relatively new. So there's a lot of questions as to the ongoing maintenance. And I guess on the last thing is that when it comes down to construction, that disruption period is always kind of a tough thing for people to go through.
Two more questions.
Yes.
So you said that the level 5 project was voted down by the legislature. Were there particular reasons? Just an uncomfort level?
There were reasons, but it had nothing to do with the project as it relates to stormwater or anything like that.
And that was in Oregon, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you had a concept design for a mall in San Mateo.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something about it just being concept because of parking requirements.
Well, it was a concept plan, and it was looking at changing the parking stall dimensions to a better dimension, smaller parking stall, not the width so much, but the length, and then the drive aisles. Changing that in concept form, being able to look at, okay, well, how much space can we save or create by doing just that exercise. So it's really looking at a parking lot code kind of exercise of changing what was existing parking lot code to something that's a little bit more bold in terms of space savings.
Okay, so you were tweaking, shrinking the size of the parking spaces.
Yes.
Okay.
But mainly, like I said, it was mainly the length of it, not so much the width, because I know that, and myself too, I've got kids, I'm not going to take a 9-foot stall and make it an 8-foot stall and try to get out of your car like this. It's mainly just the length of the stalls.
I have one from online. Can you speak about any of the safety issues with BMPs that you've encountered when they're in public right-of-way? Concerns with people falling into the planters, or?
Yeah, that actually, and that's a good, that was a concern that, following up on your question, have there been any concerns about these? And that's definitely a common one, is to looking at, the safety consideration of people actually falling into a landscape that's recessed down a bit. And some of the earlier projects that had grade changes more than, say, 6 inches of grade change, because we all experience about that level of grade change commonly out in the urban environment. We're stepping off curbs, 6 inches or so. But anything more than that, we elected to actually have some sort of a detectable material, usually a raised curb, so that if someone's caning along the street, or just if somebody can't see that there's a grade change there would be a 4-inch barrier that allows people to detect, okay, well, this is a grade change. But I started thinking that if it might be better that because you're only exacerbating the visual aspect, if we're raising up a curb and then dropping down another 6 inches, that looks a lot deeper than it really is. And I had concerns about people actually just visually seeing something that's very, very deep. So my more recent design philosophy is to try to keep these as shallow as possible, so that they're 6 inches or less deep. So it feels, and I talked about this, it feels like just a regular landscape. It's not super deep, and we're managing water into these zones, but there's not that much of a grade change. And I think inherently that helps just with overall public safety, is not having a lot of deeper stormwater facilities, especially in the right-of-way, and especially in areas that have a lot of pedestrian traffic, is to really be sure that you're comfortable about how much grade change is occurring next to the sidewalk. Some people have been experimenting with low railings, and this is very popular in back east, where there's maybe a 12-inch high steel railing that is on the perimeter of the stormwater facility. And those are effective, I think, for keeping people out. I still think people can actually trip into those, but I think it's an actual a relatively good barrier solution. Like I said before, as long as there's not much grade change, I'm less concerned about people falling into these facilities. I have yet to have a complaint of somebody actually getting hurt or a complaint of them falling into the stormwater facility. The other piece in terms of safety, and especially those facilities that are in a right-of-way, and I mentioned this before, is the plant material, making sure the plant material is relatively low growing so that you can maintain site visibility, especially with streets around corners. If there's bump outs, making sure that plant material, if someone's driving, they can see a pedestrian at the corner. And so choosing plants that are relatively low growing and low maintenance is a good safety aspect too.
All right, well, thank you for all your questions. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Kevin, Robert, Perry, for coming and sharing. It was very, very informative and encouraging. So thank you for everyone.